Red Death is now available, and we finally have a full slate of 7 combat cycle bosses in DC Dark Legion. In today's video, we're going to break down Red Death's kit. We're going to take a look at some of the champions that you should be able to use to maximize your score against Red Death and potentially get that 240th box or milestone. And of course, we'll look at a couple of those runs in action. One thing I want to point out to you, and we talked about this in the last update video that I did for the game, they have moved the rankings and daily ranking rewards over to the right-hand side of the UI here. They've added this little slider where you can see your progress towards that phase 2 where you're going to be able to get additional rewards. I've talked to a few folks, including some whales, who have been able to get to those milestones. I'm really close. I just have drowned left. Apparently phase 2 is very difficult. So I'm glad that they're offering a bit of a challenge to the people who've been complaining for weeks at this point or more that there's not much to do or there's not much of a challenge to get to the end. So curious to see how that works out over time, but definitely good to see it in the game. Let's jump into Red Death's kit. So the kit revolves around opening the space-time rifts that are going to be doing projectile damage to your team, and a couple of them you can destroy, a couple of them you can't. Red Death also dashes across the screen. It's sort of maybe like a cross between Flash and Robin, at least Robin's mechanic in the game, where he kind of dashes across to the back line. But let's look at the actual kit details. So Space Rifts is the first ability that Red Death is going to be able to do. And what he's going to do is he's going to open up 4 rifts on the edges of the screen. It's kind of in the corners. And so you're not going to be able to heavily rely on AoE damage for this fight. AoE damage characters can be helpful, but you're really going to need some heavy single target damage, whether that be physical damage dealers or spiritual, stationary, or some of your melee champions. But it's going to be very, very important that you take out those rifts as quickly as you can. Now, Red Death is going to disappear during this phase, and so you really, again, you should be focused completely on those rifts. Once they're all destroyed, Red Death reappears, and then he's going to enter into the next phase of his kit. So the next thing that Red Death is able to do is called One Man Legion. And this is, again, that ability I just mentioned where he kind of darts across the battlefield. He's going to be doing damage to anyone in his path. So be on the lookout for that as well. And then the next thing is Quantum Storm. Red Death is going to put sort of a larger rift open on the top of the map. And that rift is one that cannot be destroyed. You just kind of have to deal with the damage that's going to be coming from it, but it will do projectile damage to your teams. And then lastly, Red Death has a mechanic where he's going to be reducing healing on your entire team. So there's a little bit of theory crafting that maybe having a second healer might be necessary, but what you'll find from actually running attempts yourself is that, especially for more advanced accounts, you're not really going to need that healing at all. You can actually run this fight with no healers, and you should be able to survive the entire fight. So we'll take a look at what that looks like. But first, let's jump in and take a look at some of the characters that would be recommended for the fight. And I know from the feedback from prior videos that this guide is going to be difficult to see on screens, especially mobile devices. So apologies for that. Thinking about a different way to do this, whether I just put the graphic on the entire screen and get rid of the overlay for this portion of it. But definitely want to make sure that it's a little bit easier to view for people who are watching the video. But just keep in mind that you can download these graphics on my server as well as the official Discord server. Definitely jump over there and grab these graphics. I'm looking at maybe doing some updates visually to the rest of the combat cycle guides, but for the most part, I don't see things changing too much. You will notice a difference in this Red Death guide versus the other ones where I kind of went away from the non-spender, light spender, and whale categories for these are your viable options and the best options. So viable options means that it's a champion that would potentially do well against the boss or does do well against the boss. And then the best options are going to be champions that are really going to take you over the edge, ones that are just going to really allow you to ramp up your damage. And then I'm also including this category for support. And I think for future iterations of these guides, the support category will include healers potentially. I'll think about how to put that together. But before we get into the viable versus best options and maybe some other thoughts, I just want to point out that with the support, you can see I've included Scarecrow here, and maybe that one's a bit interesting, or people are wondering why. The reason for that is I think all of these champions are going to augment or make the other options much better. So your big damage dealers. And I think these champions clearly are not going to be putting a bunch of damage output on the board other than maybe Zatanna, but I do think that they offer more upside against Red Death by being able to help some of the other champions do more damage. Again, you're trying to destroy those space rifts, and in order to do that, you really need at least one or two of your champions to be able to really ramp up that damage. And so I think champions that are able to help your win conditions do more damage are going to be good. So that's why I've included Vixen here. I think for your newer accounts and for non-spenders, Vixen might actually be a nice option until you have the ability to obtain, say, a Zatanna, Cyborg, or a Flash, or a Batgirl. So Vixen is definitely kind of that first option that you might have until you're able to roll into something else. And again, with Scarecrow, the reason why I've included him here is because you're not really concerned about his ability to tank, and he's not going to have a ton of damage output himself. He does have some AoE abilities, which is helpful, but what he's going to be doing is making it easier for your spiritual damage dealers to get more damage on the target, and I think that's really nice. I don't know that it's really necessary to go into a long discussion of why some of these other champions are great. We know what Zatanna can do when paired with Constantine. We know what Flash can do when paired with a champion like Constantine or Sinestro or Superman. But Flash being able to cycle those ultimates is going to be incredibly beneficial, not just against this boss, but some of the other combat cycle bosses as well. And that's something that we'll probably revisit in some future videos. As far as the viable options, again, I've tried to include some champions here that I've talked about in some of my prior videos with, the best starter teams that you should be looking at and some easy champions to obtain. And we've got Green Arrow, Black Adam, and Red Hood here, which are all legendary champions that all offer some decent viability against a boss like this. We've got Harley and Batman, which are champions that you should be able to get, if not day one, pretty close to it on a new account. And obviously the Batman is going to be a more spend-oriented champion because you do have to buy those starter packs, but definitely a solid, viable option for newer players and light spenders. And then I did include Two-Face here because he sort of is able to do a decent amount of damage on his own, but he also is going to be ramping up the spiritual damage of a champion like Joker if you run him. And then Lex Luthor, especially with the addition of some new rewards tracks that you can obtain from your training simulator, it's going to be pretty easy for newer players to build up a halfway decent Lex Luthor. And that means I think he's going to offer a decent amount of viability here as well for you. Now, for best options, again, I mentioned that the whole point of this exercise is that you're trying to take care of all those rifts as quickly as you can. And it's also a single target damage boss. So you want to have champions who are able to kind of play off of those mechanics. I think that Superman offers a decent amount of viability here. Obviously, heard me plenty of times recommending that people should be building Superman. And I think he does well in pretty much all the combat cycles except for the Drowned. I think he does pretty decent against Red Death. Probably not his best boss, but he definitely does well. You're going to see a little bit more viability out of champions like Joker and Constantine, even though they are AoE damage dealers or damage over time in the case of Joker. They are still both going to be able to ramp up their damage quite well, and their AoEs will hit like 2 of the rifts at once in some cases, so that's pretty nice. Yet champions like Sinestro, which I mentioned that Flash can be very handy. Being able to cycle Sinestro's ultimate as much as possible is going to help you take those rifts out a little bit faster. So that one's very important as well. And then I think two of maybe the biggest MVPs for this game mode, or at least preliminarily, are Deathstroke and Robin, just because of the fact that they're able to kind of jet across the battlefield fairly quickly and get to all those rifts and destroy them. So I think those two, their ability to ramp up their damage quite quickly and deal with things, definitely going to want to use those if you have them built up. Let's do a couple of fights. So the first one is going to utilize champions that you should have built, even if you have a smaller account. So I'm going to go ahead and add in Superman. We'll throw in Green Arrow, Black Adam, and Red Hood, and then we'll add in Cyborg. So there's the single rift that can't be destroyed. Did a little bit of damage to our squad, and he should be opening up the other rifts in just a second. There you go. So we had 4 rifts opened up in the corners of the screen, and then you have the main rift that goes away, and he comes back onto the screen so that you can attack him again. So this is a strategy where you're trying to use Cyborg to ramp up the damage of the rest of your champions, in particular your Green Arrow and your Superman, so that you can really take out all of those rifts pretty quickly. As I mentioned, this is a fairly free-to-play accessible squad that you have here, because that Cyborg is going to be viable at 0 stars. You just need to unlock Cyborg and he's immediately going to provide some benefit for you. Obviously your Superman is going to be the big one that is going to be a little bit more difficult. But we're right here at the end of the fight and we haven't lost any of our champions. Now, I'm curious to hear from some of you who have smaller accounts, and maybe I'll test this on one of my lower level accounts that I've made recently. We'll see kind of how it pans out on one of those accounts as well, just to see whether this non-healer strategy is viable at the lower levels. But it's nice to see that you can kind of add in all of these damage dealers and use maybe one support, and you're going to be able to ramp up just a little bit higher by doing that. As expected, our Superman and Green Arrow did most of the damage here. But again, I think can't state enough that Black Adam and Red Hood are solid options for you to use here. And you can see we did 23 million damage with this. Again, this isn't going to be representative of what you're going to be able to do on a newer account, but with that team and a few months of investment into the game, you're going to be able to get 196 200 out of the 240 available milestones. So it's definitely a pretty viable option for you. And then we can take a look at the team that got me my highest score so far, which should be Superman, Sinestro, Constantine, Joker, and Green Arrow. Doesn't really matter how you have this set up, but we'll throw our best damage dealers in the back line and then we can get started. Now, I probably should have had my Superman over in the spot that Green Arrow occupied, but Red Death is not really a champion that hyper fixates on one champion on your side and kind of destroys them. So it's more of kind of a burn type thing where you really have to take out these rifts in order to avoid getting completely ruined by them. I'm really curious how they feel that the damage output from Red Death and from the rifts is performing for them, because it does seem like you can get a pretty decent amount of damage output against the rifts without too much investment. I talked about Deathstroke and Robin being great for this mode because they can maneuver around the battlefield fairly quickly. Honestly, that's probably not as big of an issue as I've made it out to be. Like, you can see that Superman was able to pretty easily run around and destroy each one of these rifts. He's not really having to take too many steps to do it either. We're coming up on the end. Looks like we're going to get several more ults before the end of the match, which is great. We're getting close to that 40 million mark, which is, I think, where I landed the last time I tried. And we can look at the damage output here as well. It's fairly spread around. which is nice. And again, you know, people have been hating on Constantine a little bit, saying that he is not viable outside of the Justice League Dark team. You can see that he did more damage than all of the other champions that I have. Granted, I have him a little bit more invested than the others, but I just think it's great that he's viable in modes like this without needing the entire JLD setup. Well, that does it for Red Death. Again, I mentioned I will have the infographic for this on my Discord as well as the official DC Dark Legion Discord. You can download that for free and utilize it. Hopefully you will find that helpful, and hopefully you found this visual guide helpful for Red Death. This video does close out the initial series for my combat cycle guides. As things are changed, I will probably revisit Combat Cycle and talk you through maybe how some of the new champions that are coming out in the bleed can affect my prior guides. There's definitely going to be some changes there. Be on the lookout for kind of a 2.0 for a lot of those. Otherwise, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. Consider subscribing so that you can see all of my future DC Dark Legion content as well as potentially other games. And I'll see you on the next video.